One of the biggest questions I'm asked if I'm ever giving a presentation is, what's the worst snowstorm? What's the worst tornado? Because right here in the United States, we do get an awful lot of weather disasters. Now, it's currently 2017. As we look back at 2016, every spot you see there was a billion-dollar weather or climate disaster. There was 12 of them that year. 3 from flooding, 2 from hail, 3 from a thunderstorm, and 4 from tornadoes. West Virginia had tornadoes and flooding at the same time. As we look back all the way to 1980, you can see Texas leads the way in billion-dollar disasters, and a lot of those Gulf Coast states are a darker red. Even Pennsylvania doesn't escape the fray. And if we go year by year, you can see that in general, the number of disasters are increasing over time. And that's adjusted for inflation. It's partially because there's more people living in the United States, or they're building their homes in more dangerous locations. So let's go over the worst weather disasters, keeping in mind this was recorded on May 3rd, 2017. So hopefully nothing worse has happened since that date. If we look at drought, the United States has never had a major loss of life due to the drought. However, that's not the same for other countries. The Great India Famine in 1876 to 1878, that killed over 25 million people. 25 million people. It's way more than New York City. It's actually way more than New York State. We did have the Dust Bowl, though, in the 1930s, which came right after the great stock market crash in 1929. So we're in the Depression, and that's where we had thick clouds of dust being blown about in the Central Plains. It took a major effort to try to keep that soil in one place. Imagine you're a farmer, and all of a sudden a dust storm comes through and lands 2 to 3 feet of dust on your crop. Now you're poor. Now you're broke. Now you're out of food. So the Dust Bowl is considered a top 10 weather event of the United States since 1900. If we look at flash floods, the worst flash flood in the United States was right here in Pennsylvania, the Great Johnstown Flood of 1889. Over 2,000 people were killed. But the biggest flood ever in the world was the Great China Flood of 31, where 4 million people died. The greatest heat wave in the United States occurred in 1980. Over 1,700 deaths are attributed to that heat outbreak in the Midwest United States. The worst in the world, though, is in 2003, over in Europe, where 37,000 plus people perished in the heat in Europe. Most were elderly, and they had no access to air conditioning. Remember, the best way to survive a heat wave is to get to a place that has air conditioning, or if you have it, to turn it on and use it. There were 7 days in France that were over 104 degrees. This is a map of the anomalous temperatures, and you can see wherever there's a darker red, the worse the heat conditions were. The worst blizzard in the United States was well before our births, the 1888 blizzard. It affected the East Coast, killed 400 people, and it was in early March. They had 40 to 50 inches just of snow in New York and New Jersey, with drifts up to 50 feet. 50 feet, that's 5 stories. That would cover Hempfield High School. The blizzard of 93 is the second worst blizzard ever, with 318 people who died as a result of it. But the worst ever was 1972 in Iran. When I mention that, people look at me with a puzzled look. Iran, though it's in the Middle East, it has a lot of high mountains. And in the Iranian blizzard, 4,000 people died. 26 feet of snow was in certain places. 26 feet. Entire villages ended up buried as a result of this storm. Now back in 1888, this is the weather map of that storm. Notice the low pressure just off the coast, and those isobars are very, very close together. Closer isobars means faster wind. So this is one big blizzard right here. Pictures from the day shows telegraph wires hanging towards the ground and snow just piled stories high. The worst hurricane in the United States also happened before any of us were born. It's the Galveston hurricane. That killed 12,000 people and occurred in the year 1900, back at a time where it was hard to know whether these big storms were coming. People were trapped out on Galveston Island, they had no way of escaping, and then the island ended up underwater. The entire island was submerged. Hurricane Katrina ends up fourth on that list, and Superstorm Sandy, which was a hurricane at one point and then was declassified as a hurricane before it hit New York City, that's 11th on the list. The worst hurricane in the world was Cyclone Gola. 500,000 people were killed. November 13th, 1970. The storm surge killed most of those people. That's a part of the world where sea level does not rise very quickly. So big waves came in and people just couldn't escape. These are pictures after the Galveston hurricane. Just total devastation to the island. That's the bank, the strongest building on the island, but the rest of the island basically was washed away and disappeared. And hurricanes and typhoons can come in different sizes. Super Typhoon Tip in 1979 is the largest recorded hurricane on record. It had 160-mile-an-hour winds. Absolutely huge. If you put it over the United States, it would take up much of the West Coast. The worst tornado in the United States is the Tri-State tornado that killed 695 people back in 1925. It went through Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. And the worst in the world is the Cedar tornado. It killed over 1,300 people in 1989 in Bangladesh. So other countries can get tornadoes. It's just the United States has much more on average than those other places. This is the map of the path of the Tri-State tornado. The worst super outbreak I used to talk about was in 1974, but with 309 deaths in 13 states and a tornado every 3 minutes. But now the worst is the one that I just talked about in our lesson in 2011. 339 deaths in 8 states and 1 Canadian province. Remember that we broke the record in April of 2011 with 921 tornadoes. That's the most. It doubled the previous record. 211 tornadoes occurred just in one day on April 27th. So that's a quick summary of the worst weather that's ever happened, and we've gotten to the end of our module, and we're just about done with our class. The next video is going to go over what we're going to do for your final exam, called The Week.